I can just say that as I come from Israel, I've been living there now for 23, 24 years. And after spending Shabbat at the Chabad of Ilovo by Rabbi Michael Katz, at one point during Shabbat, I said, who else here is Chabad besides for the rabbi? And I looked around because there was no one else who looked like they were Chabad. But what it made me realize is what's really, I think, the secret to your community. You accept everybody. You're not sectarian. You're not putting people in boxes. You're not categorizing or cataloging different Jews based on the kippah they wear or the suit they wear, or do they do this or do they do that, or do they drive on Shabbat or do they not drive on Shabbat. Round of applause, really. We in Israel can take a huge lesson from the diaspora, and it's something that always inspires me when I travel around the world. A few years ago, back when I was, before I became editor of the newspaper and I was then the military reporter, I had an opportunity, like I often did, to join the chief of staff of the IDF, of the Israel Defense Forces, for a tour. That day we were heading off to the West Bank city of Nablus, one of the larger Palestinian cities in the West Bank, home to about 200,000 people. The Palestinian Stock Exchange is based in Nablus, a real commercial center. We spend the day going around the city, the different IDF positions that are around, speaking to soldiers, to officers, getting intelligence briefings, of course lunch, because you got to have lunch. And the day comes to an end. We bid farewell to the regional brigade commander, this paratrooper officer named Colonel Nimrod Aloni. We get into the chief of staff's Jeep, and we start driving back towards the helipad for the helicopter ride back to Tel Aviv. And as we're taking this windy dirt road right below an Israeli Jewish settlement on the mountain above, General Gantz, the chief of staff at the time, says to his driver, "Stop the car." The driver says, "What?" Gantz says, "Stop the car." Slams the brakes. Gantz pulls over to his aide. He says to him, "Give me your phone." Calls up Nimrod Aloni, the colonel who he had just bid farewell to moments earlier. Says, "Nimrod, my Jeep has been hit by a roadside bomb. I'm injured. A soldier has been abducted. Get here." Slams the phone shut. Now, there was no roadside bomb. No one was injured. No soldier had been abducted. General Gantz gets out of the Jeep, walks over to a boulder, sits down, picks up a twig, starts to twirl it in his hands, looks at his silver Breitling watch. It always seems to me that generals in the IDF always have these silver Breitling watches. I think they give them out there. But starts counting down the minutes. I'm just standing, watching, observing. A minute goes by, 2 minutes go by, 3 minutes go by. Suddenly, from every direction, you see these Hummer armored Jeeps converge on the scene. You see soldiers scrambling with their full combat gear, helmets, vests, assault rifles. You start to hear a buzz, bzzz, up in the air above, in the skies. They come, General Gantz stands up, shakes everyone's hand, says, "Thanks for coming," gets back into the Jeep, and we drive away. And I saw two things that day, two lessons that I learned. One, and this is what Gantz was trying to teach the military, and it's a lesson that is still important for the IDF today. When we look around our borders in Israel and the volatile situation that we face with Hezbollah in Lebanon, ISIS, Al-Qaeda in the north, ISIS in the Sinai, Hamas in the Gaza Strip, a conflict can erupt at a moment's notice. You won't be prepared. You might not have intelligence, but you have to be ready. The second thing I noticed that day was the technology, the weaponry that we saw just in that little scene that came to that little dirt road. The soldiers who scrambled were carrying an assault rifle called the Tavor, made by an Israeli company called Israel Weapons Industries. It's a new assault rifle, more effective, came in to replace the M16, the American-made assault rifle that the IDF had been using for decades. You can now find the Tavor across the globe. It's being used in Thailand, Australia, Colombia, Brazil, and of course in Israel. The second thing I noticed with these Hummer Jeeps, each Hummer Jeep had a screen, a plasma TV screen inside. This plasma TV screen is part of a program called Sayad. That's Hebrew for hunter. It's a digital army program. But basically what it does, imagine Waze, right? You all know what Waze is, right? But imagine Waze or Google Maps for the military. So I know if I'm an Israeli unit, I see where all the other friendly forces are, all the other Israeli units are, and I also can see where the enemy is. All I have to do is touch the screen, and that creates an enemy position that then everyone else can see. So you can imagine how much faster, how much quicker we can get a scene and understanding, situational awareness of what's happening on the battlefield. And that buzz that I heard in the sky above, those were drones. Just earlier that year, the IDF had rolled out a new program called the Skyrider program, where they equipped every battalion with their own drone capability to see what's happening just over the hill. And these were drones that were deployed around Nablus that day. So it made me wonder, why Israel? How is it that such a tiny little country, Israel, home to just 8 million people, 6 million Jews, 2 million Arab citizens, how is it that we are transforming the way wars are being fought in the 21st century? How is it that Israel today has a 60% market share on the export of drones around the world, bringing in over $1 billion to $1.5 billion annually into the Israeli economy? How is it that Israel, tiny little Israel, has taken up a spot as one of the top 5 or 6 arms exporters in the world, with exports reaching $6.5, $7 billion annually? Why us? Why not someone else? And I think there are a number of answers, but I want to tell you a couple of stories first. I want to take you back to 1968. We're a few months after the Six-Day War, the war that was fought in 1967, the summer of '67. We'll be celebrating now 50 years to the liberation of Jerusalem, the conquering of the Golan, Judea and Samaria, the West Bank, the Gaza Strip, the Golan Heights, the Sinai. But then we had a unique problem. Israel, under the ceasefire lines, was on one side of the Suez Canal in the Sinai, and the Egyptians were on the other side. And we just couldn't see what was happening just over the Suez. We're talking about half a football pitch away, 50 yards, not far. But we couldn't see what was happening. So they come up with an idea. The Air Force takes its fighter aircraft, they fly them high up in an altitude. They can't cross into Egypt, that might start another war. Fly them high up in Israeli airspace on an angle, they try to take pictures come back, no good. Can't see anything. All they want to see is Egypt preparing again for war? 50 yards away. Okay, they got another idea. An officer builds a tower on top of a tank, stands up, peers over the border with binoculars. Egyptian takes a shot, gets injured, not going to work. Now they come up with the real plan. They take a spy. They fly him to Europe, from Europe to Cairo. From Cairo, he drives and makes his way up to the Sinai, to the Suez, takes photos secretly, travels back to Cairo, flies back to Europe, flies back to Tel Aviv. They develop the film. Wow, they have their first photos. This is insane, right? They just need to see what's happening right there. There was one officer that day who was in military intelligence headquarters when the spy came back with the first photos and said to himself, this is crazy. There has to be an easier way to see what's happening. It doesn't make sense. On his drive home that night, he remembers that he saw a movie not long ago, and I'm told back in the 60s, before my time, that before the feature film, there was something called the newsreel, right, where they would show some news. And in this newsreel, they showed an American Jewish kid who, for his bar mitzvah, got a toy airplane. Couldn't get toy airplanes in Israel that time. To make a long story short, within a few months, a member of Israel's defense delegation to New York went to a New York toy store. I'm told it was FAO Schwartz on Fifth Avenue over there, if you've been before. Goes in, buys 3 toy airplanes, a couple of spare engines, propellers, some wheels. They put it in the diplomatic pouch because they don't want anyone asking questions why some Israeli flying with 3 toy airplanes back to Israel. They get back to Israel, they attach a camera to their belly, and in July of 1969, the maiden flight of a drone took place over the Suez Canal with a toy airplane. That's where the first drone was born, on the shores of the Suez in 1969 with a toy airplane. Now fast forward to the 1980s. You know where America bought its first drones from? They were spending billions and billions of dollars. Lockheed Martin was trying to build a program called the Aquila. Boeing was trying to build a drone called the Condor. These things couldn't fly. 1983, the Secretary of the Navy of the United States comes to Israel, sees Israeli drones, purchases 75 of them. The first drones that flew in the United States were Israeli drones. A fascinating story. They saw combat a few years later when they were deployed in 1991 in the first Gulf War. Just one amazing little story. A group of Iraqi soldiers were standing in the desert. Suddenly they see a drone flying above. They take off their uniforms, they take off their t-shirts, they fly them on a flag, and they surrender to a robot they had never seen before, an Israeli robot. But basically what you saw on the shores of the Suez back in July of '69, you're all familiar with the saying, necessity is the mother of all invention. But I like to call it what the founder of Israel's satellite program told me once, a great line: the shadow of the guillotine sharpens the mind. If you think about Israel, from inception, a country that has been threatened, that has been invaded, that has faced terror, a war every decade, 48, 56, 67, 73, the first intifada, the second intifada, the second Lebanon war, the Gaza operations, the Gaza war of 2014, the recent stabbing intifada. When your back is up against the wall, you have no choice but to be creative. You have no choice but to innovate. I want to take you even further back in time. When I was doing the research for my book, Weapon Wizards, How Israel Became a High-Tech Military Superpower, one of the main heroes is without a doubt Shimon Peres, the late president of Israel, passed away this past year. When I went to meet with President Peres, he told me a story that blew my mind. I want to share it with you. Shimon Peres, his name was originally Persky, moved from Poland to Israel, lived in a kibbutz in the Jordan Valley. So back in 1947, still before the state of Israel was even born, his kibbutz had a vote one night, and they decided to send young Shimon, he was in his 20s, to the Red House in Tel Aviv. That was where the Haganah headquarters were. They stuff a few liras into his pocket, send him on his way. Shimon gets to the Red House, ready to enlist in the war effort. They know war is coming. What should I do? People look at him, they say, we got nothing for you. Asks another person, what do you want me to do? Nothing. Then from the staircase, he sees Ben-Gurion. Now, you'd known Ben-Gurion, they had met before because of party politics. Ben-Gurion says, oh, great, you're here. Shimon says, great, what do you want me to do? We'll let you know. He's standing there all uncomfortable. He starts to sweat. I'm gonna go back home empty-handed. I haven't done anything. They don't need me. And then a friend of his says, you know what? The commander of the Haganah forces is out sick today. Why don't you go sit in his office? Okay. He goes, he sits in his office. Shimon Peres is a very curious person. Starts to open the drawers. He opens one drawer, another drawer. And then in one of the drawers, he finds a letter to Ben-Gurion. Takes out the letter. He opens it up. He starts to read the letter, and his heart sank. It was a letter written by an officer of the Haganah who had been offered to become the first chief of staff of Tzahal, of the IDF. And in the letter, this officer was explaining to Ben-Gurion why he had to decline the offer, the nomination. He says to Ben-Gurion, I've looked into it. Turns out we have 6 million bullets. And according to my estimates, in a war, when it breaks out, we'll need 1 million bullets a day. And I'm not willing to be chief of staff for just 6 days. That's how dire the situation was in 1947, 1948. You might be familiar with Machon Ayalon, the Ayalon Institute. Near Rehovot, the Haganah built an underground bullet factory beneath a laundromat and a bakery to create bullets because they couldn't get their hands on weapons. But I think that's the unique story of Israel. That is the Israeli tale. A tale of a people, an ancient people who returned to their historic homeland and not just survived, but persevered. They did it with their backs up against the wall, and they did it with the one resource they had. We had no oil. Now we found gas, right? Billions and billions of dollars worth of gas will be flowing soon into the Israeli economy. But you know what I say? Baruch Hashem, that we found the gas now and not 70 years ago. Because just imagine for a moment, had we found gas when Israel was established in 1948, you would have no startup nation. You would have no high tech. When you had no resources, you had no choice but to innovate, but to use your one resource, the Jewish brain. And that's why we today, 50% of Israeli exports is technology. But again, the question is why? How did Israel succeed where others didn't? I want to propose a few answers. The first is necessity, like I just spoke about, the drones, the bullets. The second is what I call chutzpah, a Jewish trait. We all have it. We question authority. I told over Shabbat when I was enlisted into the IDF about 20 years ago. Basic training started, it was the heat of the summer in August. We weren't allowed to wear sunglasses because it's disrespectful to your commander. Right? If I wear sunglasses while talking to my commander, that's disrespectful. So for the first few weeks, we're without sunglasses, squinting in the sun. It's painful, it's hard. 3-4 weeks into basic training, they gather us in a chet formation, like the Hebrew letter chet. That's how we used to stand at attention to receive our commander. And they tell us, from now on you can wear sunglasses, from now on you can call your commander by his first name. There's no more distance. That was the Hebrew word. I'm not sure they knew it was an English word. But we basically, if you think about it for a moment, the Israeli military has a ceremony to demolish hierarchy, to demolish structure, to break away discipline. A military is supposed to be a place that gives you discipline, not breaks away discipline. But that's what's unique about the Israeli military. A free flow, a free exchange of ideas enables us to talk, to exchange information, to talk to people eye to eye. We don't have to worry about rank or status. We are able to talk to each other, and that's how you also can innovate and can be creative. When the commander of the Israeli Air Force, for example, a major general, flies in an F-16, behind him is flying a 25-year-old pilot. And when they get out of that cockpit, that 25-year-old pilot will criticize the commander of the Air Force as if he's 25 years old himself. Because there is no rank in the cockpit. And when you have that culture, for better or for worse, right? You know, you're all familiar with Israel. It doesn't always work out. But when you have that kind of culture, it might be difficult when it comes to strategic, long-term planning. But when it comes to improvisation, when it comes to creativity, that's the culture you need. What we also have, which is unique, is a dual identity. When you're a soldier, that's an identity you carry for life. I continue to serve in the reserves in Miluim, as do my friends. I met a couple years ago this amazing man by the name of Amit Wolf. He's an engineer for Israel Aerospace Industries, one of the top aerospace companies in Israel and in the world. Before he became an engineer, he served in an IDF unit called Maglan, one of the more elite covert units in the Israel Defense Forces. They operate deep behind enemy lines, special operations. And now he's in his job, he's in the drone department of IAI, of Israel Aerospace Industries. And they got to come up, they start to think about, brainstorm, what new drones can we make? What can we do? What would the industry require today? They're sitting at a coffee shop, him and his team, throwing out ideas, checking on YouTube videos to see what's cool out there, what has Hollywood got coming out in their new movies. And then he remembers an operation that he was once on in Nablus, same city I had visited with the chief of staff. And there, him and his unit were walking through the narrow alleyways of Nablus, searching for wanted terrorists. And they get to this wall, and they couldn't see what was happening just over the wall. He says to himself, if only we had a drone, carrying my backpack, could pull out, could take off like a helicopter, fly up, see what's happening, and give it to me on my screen. That would be great. Fast forward a year, Israel Aerospace Industries rolls out the first vertical takeoff and landing drone called Panther. Because Amit served in the military, he knows what the military needs, and vice versa. That dual identity that we have in Israel is an asset of national proportion. In America, for example, when Lockheed or Boeing want to develop a new weapon, a new platform, a new aircraft, those engineers, they need to bring in military folks to give them the input because they don't have that experience like Amit Wolf and his friends do. There's no degree of separation when you look at the IDF. But with all this amazing weaponry, with this innovative technology, with the smarts of the IDF and its officers and its soldiers and its scientists and engineers, the challenges that we're facing are daunting. And I'll talk a little about this later in the day in my second talk. But when we look at conflicts that we might be facing on the horizon, they will be difficult, they will be devastating potentially for Israel, and you need to be prepared. Israel was the country that invented drones. But you know what happened in 2006? Hezbollah flew explosives-packed drones into Israeli airspace to try to bomb different targets in Israel. Just last week, Hamas flew a drone from Gaza into Israel before it was shot down. Israel, the country that invented drones, is now the first state to be attacked by drones used by a non-state actor. Israel, with its impressive missile defense technology, Iron Dome, David Sling, Arrow 1, Arrow 2, Arrow 3, has that deterred our enemies from assembling and amassing a massive missile technology and missile arsenal? No. Hezbollah in 2006, in the Second Lebanon War, had 15,000 rockets and missiles. Today, 130,000. Hamas, in 2014, fired thousands of rockets into Israel, into Tel Aviv, into Jerusalem. Since then, have they gone down in numbers? No, they've just gone up. And as recent events show, rockets being fired from Sinai, from Gaza, just in recent weeks, a potential conflict in Gaza is, unfortunately, a matter of time. So what will we see differently? How will the next war be different? And I think I want to focus on just three different possibilities. Things that the IDF today, that Israel is putting a larger, stronger emphasis on. Tunnels, the tunnel technology that we see today. We saw that these tunnels were dug from Gaza into Israel back in the 2014 Gaza war. Took Israel by surprise. Israel was not ready. We had the state comptroller report that came out this past week. But I think what we need to remember is that wars are not fought in laboratories or in classrooms. Wars are fought on battlefields. And there's one thing to always expect at war. It's the unexpected. Expect the unexpected. You won't know what will happen. You can try to prepare. You can try to train. But the biggest problem for militaries is that their last point of reference is the last war. You want to prepare for the next war. And that's what's difficult. But today, the Israel Defense Forces has created a new doctrine for how to combat in tunnels, how to detect tunnels, how to create barriers for tunnels. The second thing we'll see are more robots, more standoff munitions. The IDF today is the only country, the only military in the world that uses UGVs, unmanned ground vehicles, for patrols along its borders. These little dune buggies that have no one riding them but are from a remote control from a distance with weapons and rifles on them to patrol the borders instead of putting soldiers in harm's way. Today, there's no operation in the IDF that takes place that doesn't include drones, that drones are not a part of. And then there's the legitimacy. This is key for Israel. Israel as a country has always sought international recognition, legitimacy by the world, that it should be accepted as a nation among the community of nations. We see what's happening at the United Nations as an example. In the last 10 years, 250 anti-Israel resolutions at the United Nations. Guess how many on Syria? Guess. 8. 8 in 10 years. 250, and they get 8? But despite that, we recognize in Israel that we have to work together with the world. International legitimacy is a key component for Israel to be able to continue its operations, to be able to fight. But how do you do that when the whole world is lined up against you? How do you do that when you know that no matter what you do, you will be criticized by the world? You know, back in 2008, in the first big Gaza operation, after Israel's withdrawal in 2005, remember Israel pulled out of Gaza in 2005. Goes back in 2008, Operation Cast Lead. Now before the operation, the IDF gathered all of the phone numbers of all of the homes in Gaza. Cell phone numbers, not just home numbers. Because they knew that Hamas was storing its weapons, its rockets, its missiles, its command centers inside homes, in basements, beneath hospitals. So what they would do is very simple. Let's say they wanted to bomb home X. They'd call up, they'd say in Arabic to whoever answered the phone, you got about 10 minutes, we're going to bomb your home. You have a Hamas command post, you have an arms cache. 10 minutes later, people would leave. Boom, they'd bomb the home. You'd see the secondary explosions from the rockets and explosives that they were hiding in their basement. Everything was fine. Civilian casualties were spared. But then on the 45th time that they tried to do this, they call up the home. They say, you got 10 minutes. People don't leave. They call again. People don't leave. Not only do they not leave, they have drones flying above, because like I said, there's no operation, there's no bombing without a drone, transmitting the images back to headquarters in Tel Aviv. And they notice that the people are climbing to the roof, and they know that there's a drone up there, and they're waving up at the drone, hey, how you doing? They can't bomb the home. Okay. They wait till tomorrow. They call again tomorrow. You got 10 minutes to leave. Again, they climb to the roof, they wave up at the drone. So one officer there says to himself, I have an idea. Let's take we have these small little bombs. They have no dispersion, there's no fragmentation of shrapnel. We'll fire it into a corner of the roof. We'll scare them. And then they'll flee, they'll leave the home. They do that. People get terrified, scared. They think, oh my God, Israel's attacking, even though they know we're here. And they leave the home. You know what they call that tactic? Knocking on the roof. Literally, Israel knocks on the roof before it bombs what once was a civilian infrastructure, a home, but has become a military target. Does it have to? According to international law, no. Once a civilian facility has taken upon itself a military application, it's a legitimate target. Now you have to ask yourself, proportion. Is the value of the target, does that outweigh the loss of life? But if so, and this is very complicated, but if so, if the legal experts determine that yes, you don't have to call them, you don't have to knock on the roof, but this is the military that we have. And what do we get for it? Do we get a standing ovation? Do we get applauded do we get an applause in the United Nations General Assembly or at the Security Council? No. Unfortunately, we get met with criticism, reports like the Goldstone report, Judge Goldstone from South Africa originally. We get met with 2334, the United Nations Security Council resolution that passed shamefully just a few months ago, in the twilight time of President Barack Obama's tenure. That is what Israel finds itself up against. Those are the challenges that we face today. So the question is, how can we still succeed? And I think that the answer is something that has always blown my mind ever since I moved to Israel 23 years ago. When I came to Israel in 1993, this was the period of peace. I remember I was then in 9th grade, watching on TV Yitzhak Rabin, Yasser